Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. How are you all doing? Are you all hanging in there? Is it just me, or does it feel like our senses are being heightened right now? You know, if you could be going for a walk, go for a run, listening to the birds in the sky, the smell of the great outdoors, feeling the wind in your hair, suddenly feels like something that you would just never take for granted again. Just let myself daydream. And while I was doing that, I was thinking about athletes the other day, especially athletes in this time of self-isolation and social distancing. And for example, if you were a cyclist or an athlete or training for something huge like the Olympics, how would you keep yourself in world-class condition? And what role would technology take in making all that possible? And my thought process led me to a company called Wattbike that is obsessed with performance. And since they started work on their pioneering indoor power trainer in 2000, I learned how they become obsessed with perfectly replicating the sensation of riding on the road. And as a result, they became further obsessed with generating the world's most accurate power technique and giving riders access to performance data, all while on a mission to create the ultimate indoor cycling experience. Now, they have worked with some of the world's best sports cyclists and engineers to shape their data in different ways. So I wanted to learn more about how that helps them deliver actionable insights to riders in real time, including their unique and patented Polar View technology. So after reading all about that, it occurred to me that these guys were ahead of their time, and this technology is even more invaluable now than ever before. So I invited Richard Baker, CEO at Wattbike, onto the podcast. So enough from me. Let's get Richard onto the podcast now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, hi Neil. I'm Richard Baker. I'm the CEO of Wattbike. I've been at Wattbike this is my 9th year now, but I was actually bumped into Wattbike in about 2009 when I was previously at a company called Technogym and got asked to write an internal green paper on the product at the time, and was quite taken by it because I was heading up a health corporate and medical side of the business for Technogym, and needed something measurable and reliable in terms of data, and this was really the only thing on the market. And Wattbike had launched in about 2008, so just the year before that, and so we're relatively new to the market, and to the fitness world and to the consumer world itself. So it was a very interesting business to come in contact with.
And for people hearing about Wattbike for the very first time, can you just talk me through exactly what Wattbike is, and also what is the driving force behind this international brand?
Yeah, so first and foremost, we're obsessed with performance, and that goes back to the early days of the development in the early 2000s when our founder Ian Wilson and the team went and spoke to a gentleman called Peter Keane, and Peter Keane was the performance director at British Cycling, and was also Chris Boardman's coach, who was a top Olympic and British cyclist at the time. And there wasn't somebody really better qualified to talk to anybody about what an indoor bike could and should do. And so he wrote up a pretty extensive list of items and said, right, well, look, if you're going to produce this gold standard in indoor exercise bikes, then this is what it needs to be. And it needs to be very accurate. It needs to be very reliable. It needs to be accessible from Olympic athletes through to grassroots athletes and people who just want to ride for fitness. So it needed to be affordable as well. So it became quite a challenge for the team. And so end up developing an indoor exercise bike that mimics the way that the sensations you feel when you ride on the road, So the kinetic energy and the inertia you need to come over when you first pedal a stroke on a bike, to the different speeds that you go on the road or inclines, that feel if you've ever ridden a bike, you'll know, changes. So to replicate that onto a indoor bike is very difficult to do, and took many years to get the design right. And then we also wanted to make sure we were capturing the really accurate and reliable and quantifiable data within the bike. So that could be used for talent ID, for better performance development of athletes, and then as the sport's grown, for general athletes to become fitter and healthier.
And every day on this tech podcast, I do try and understand how technology is transforming multiple industries and also areas where you don't automatically associate technology with. So with that in mind, what does the technology landscape look like right now in the cycling world?
It's a fascinating space at the moment, and it's really being driven not just because of the pandemic we're in at the moment with COVID-19. Prior to that, since 2012, really, we've seen this big surge in indoor cycling. But of course, at the moment, it's with people being at home and not being able to get out, and even if they can get out, it's a short period of time. We are really seeing the indoor cycling space sort of driving the cycling industry. That's even happening in terms of racing online now. Even over the weekend, there was Team Ineos, which is one of the top teams in the world that would normally race at the likes of Tour de France. We're racing online on a platform called Zwift on indoor trainers. So you can see how the cycling space itself is being driven by the ability to ride on indoor equipment on virtual platforms. So that's really driving the space for the cycling industry. Data itself is becoming more and more relevant to people, and that could be used again at the very peak for world and Olympic champions and top teams, but right through down to data where people want health data to be able to load up to show that they're improving, or it might be even to prove to their insurance company that they're fit and healthy, so their premium can come down. So it's becoming very multifaceted in the way that it can drive into other industries.
How have you guys incorporated technology into the Wattbike product line? Because the technology plays a big part in what you're doing as well, doesn't it?
It does, and it has done from the early days in the early 2000s through to our launch in 2008 and through. And what we achieved at that point was the gold standard in terms of an indoor bike, and it which led to the British Cycling and other organisations around the world being able to use a product for talent ID because of the accuracy and reliability of that the data. But there's two key parts really to the tech. I've mentioned it a couple of times here. Is the measurability, so the accuracy of the data, the reliability of that data that we measure in the bike. So we measure every pedal revolution, and we are measuring twice around that pedal revolution as you're pedaling that bike around, and we're measuring the forces and the velocity to do that. We're actually measuring we're sampling that at 1,000 hertz. So basically 1,000 times a second, we're measuring what's happening in your pedal stroke. So that allows us to get into really finite detail, even to the point where we can look at your pedaling technique. We can look at any deficiencies in your pedaling stroke. That might be muscular coming from your back or your lower limbs. So the bike can get used for rehab. So there's a lot happening in that core part of the bike where we're measuring. But what's really important and what can often be missed is getting that accident reliability right, but actually having the resistance against it right. So if you have the resistance against that you're using the bike, so rather than just what could be a flywheel or a crude magnet, then the behaviours in your pedal stroke will be different to actually what happens when you ride a bike on the road. So we've spent many years getting the power curve, as we call it, absolutely right. And what I mean by that power curve is so from that first pedal stroke, overcoming the inertia of riding a bike, all the way up to over 3,000 watts of power would be required to reach high speeds or climb up a mountain. We keep that power curve extremely smooth, and so it actually feels like riding a bike, so it's engaging the muscles in the right way. So there's two core elements to the tech that's within our products.
And of course, at the moment, we are all self-isolating, and exercise can be a little bit difficult, especially with all the gyms being closed. And a lot of people are turning to exercising indoors. And two products that really stood out for me was obviously the Wattbike Atom, which is considered to be the world's smartest indoor trainer. I mean, can you explain exactly what that is, what it means, and what makes it different from other things out there, such as the Peloton?
Yeah, okay. So I won't go over the answer I went before in terms of the core technologies and the resistance system and the measurement system. They're core to that. The part that makes it smart is that we can connect to any other platform or our own proprietary app, which you can then set training plans to. We can actually take a GPS file of a mountain in the Alps in France, or Box Hill in Surrey in the UK, or a climb in the US, and we can replicate that climb, and the resistance system will change depending on the gradient of that climb, and then the rider will have to overcome that just as they would do if they're on their bike. We can also connect to other third-party platforms such as Zwift or Trainer Road. There's various training platforms out there, and that will control the bike, and it controls the motor on the bike. And so we're replicating that ride feel, and then we're measuring at the same time. Whereas a Peloton bike has a great connection with its videos, has lots of entertainment, but wouldn't be termed as smart. It's a basic spin bike with a flywheel. So effectively, you've got some cranks on a chain or a belt that drives the flywheel around. So there's no controllability over that resistance.
Gotcha. And so is that the real ride feel technology, I think it's referred to on the website? Is that right?
Yeah, that is. Yeah, and that's the bit I was referring to where I'm talking about that power curve, to making sure we replicate that as smoothly as possible, so it doesn't become clunky as you sort of go through the different levels. If you pedal fast, there's two ways to produce force. You either increase the speed of your legs going around, or you increase the resistance. So on a road bike, that would be changing up and down the gears to increase or decrease the resistance, or pedaling faster. And the combination of those two, so that force and velocity relationship is really important. And that's the two bits we really focus in on our tech, so that force and velocity, to get that smoothness of resistance.
And if we do have any cyclists listening there, or want to be cyclists, what kind of performance data does the Wattbike Atom riders have access to?
We measure power, so in watts, and so you can see how much force you're producing. The really nice thing about that, and if you're not a cyclist but you'd like to keep fit, is that it's where you might use heart rate normally, and we obviously do use heart rate on the bike, and look at that relationship between heart rate and power, but power isn't variable, whereas heart rate is extremely variable. So what I mean by that is, if you've been having a cup of coffee, or you've had a bad night's sleep, or you're particularly stressed, your heart rate can be quite variable on a daily basis. And power isn't. Power is either it's consistent. So if you're not feeling well, your power will be down. There'll be a reason for it. So you can ignore that, but your post the session or the next day, you won't feel particularly well. So it's a really good indicator that you're not feeling particularly well, or it's a good performance indicator if it's up, that you're improving, and you can see those consistent improvements. So power is the core of what we're doing, but we also measure the left leg and right leg power independently. And so we can look at any changes if you're stronger in one leg than the other, and what those reasons might be. So it's good for a rehab tool. We also then combine that. We measure via some relays on the cranks, and we look at what we call the force profile. So we call it our pedaling effectiveness score. So we can score you, and we color code that from green, amber to red, depending on your technique. So if you think of a different sport like swimming, and we all know how swimming, not really down to fitness, it's down to technique, how good a swimmer you are. Well, we do very similar on the bike. So we can make something that's normally invisible very, very visual. So you can improve your technique as much as your fitness.
And why is technology so important, do you think, when it comes to training and performance?
To make those changes in your performance, and when I say that, it doesn't just have to be an Olympic standard cyclist or athlete. It could be somebody that's off a cardiac rehab surgeon's table, or for somebody that's coming rehabbing because they have diabetes or a musculoskeletal injury. If you haven't got the data to measure, you can't measure those improvements to get better again. So you need a baseline of where you are, and then you can make steps towards making that performance improvement. And so having the data allows you to measure those improvements, and also focus on the pieces that we're weakest on.
And although we are locked down, it is in a period of uncertainty at the moment. What do you think we can expect from the cycling world in 2020? Because I'm already seeing that Tour de France is obviously going to be cancelled. Well, it appears that way. But what do you think we can expect from the industry this year?
Yeah, I think even pre the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw there was a report from Strava that was already saying that indoor cycling was one of the fastest growing areas of cycling anyway. I think we're going to see an increase in people taking that up indoor cycling as part of their fitness and health just generally, because it's very accessible. It allows you to be social because we all create communities through it. You can get onto platforms and ride with friends and family. It doesn't matter where they are in the world, and you can share that data with people and your training journey on the likes of Strava. So I think we're going to see a lot of that continualize. Well, what we're actually seeing is just almost a double down effect in terms of the growth. So it was always there, but I think people that were considering it before are now making that step to say, yes, look, from a physical health point of view, but also from a mental health point of view, this is an important part of my life, and I'm now going to invest. Whereas, it was already growing before, but this has really accelerated that. I think we're going to see greater participation of esport events, and so we'll see whether that's racing or just mass participation events. So riding from the comfort of your home, but onto but actually joining other people on platforms around the world. And I'm probably, particularly with the events that we're seeing that people would normally do being cancelled and sort of no sign of them picking up again. So I think that's going to be a big part of that.
And for anyone listening that would like to find out more information about Wattbike, check out a few videos, understand a little bit more about the kind of work that you're doing, what's the best way of doing that?
The best way to do it is through our website. So it's wattbike.com. We do have quite a bit of information on our social channels as well via Instagram and Facebook, but definitely our website would be the best place to go and get some more information about us.
Well, I've loved chatting with you today and understanding how technology is impacting your world and how Wattbike for the home and how it's almost tailor-made for this environment that we're in at the moment, especially how Atom utilises technology to enable riders to connect, but also with multiple cycling applications. I think that is so important too. But more than anything, just a big thank you for taking the time to speak with me today, Richard.
Great. Thanks, Neil. Thanks for your time.
I loved hearing more there about what the technology landscape looks like right now in the cycling world, and how that technology has been incorporated into Wattbike and their product lines. But also the role that the company is playing in keeping people motivated and achieving that optimal performance during this time of self-isolation and social distancing, and perfectly using technology to replicate the sensation of riding on the road. But as always, let me know your thoughts about Wattbike, indoor exercise, technology, how you're coping, and whatever it is, even if you just want to ask me a question, by emailing me techblogwriter@outlook.com, tweeting me at Neil C. Hughes, and my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. Speaking of which, it's time for my one piece of exercise a day now, so I'm going to go outside, fill up my senses in the great outdoors, and I'll return again tomorrow with another guest. So a big thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.